Hi, and welcome to Funky Rainbow's Book Bazaar. I'm just going to check if our stream is live. And yes, I can see a thumbs up from Sham. We're hosting it again from this city that has become a favorite of Team Funky Rainbows, Chandigarh. And we are presently at St. Kabir Public School, where we've conducted a lit fest across the last week, filled with books, filled with writers, illustrators, and of course, students from grades 1 to grades 11, all of whom absolutely engrossed in the world of books, storytelling, and all the masti and maza that accompanies this. I mean, like I said, this is our third bazaar from Chandigarh, and it's really become a favorite city of all of us at Team Funky Rainbow. It's a pleasure to be at a school that supports reading, as much as we've seen this school do. It's an integral part of everything they do in their classroom. It's an integral part of the school curriculum and the Lit Fest. I mean, all the authors who were here across the week, engaging children from grades 1 to grades 11, each one telling us, how the power of stories transforms the lives of students. I mean, really brings alive the world, for students. So it's a pleasure really to be at a school where they have so much faith in the power of stories. And in fact, it's that which absolutely motivated the theme of this bazaar, of stories in the classroom. Now, as against stories that you read, I mean, for pleasure, which is something that we completely believe in any case. How can stories become an integral part of the classroom? And it was in that light, I mean, especially when you're in a school and engaging with students and trying to ensure that everything that you present to them is in the form of a memorable story, something that they're going to remember, something that they participate in. That makes you relook at the books in your collection to think of how, which ones in this collection are best to be used by teachers, librarians, and even parents, in an educational context, or let's say in a classroom setting. So that's exactly what prompted this bazaar, and we're delighted that our guest who will join us later in the week, later in the show, has exactly this experience, the lived experience of being a storyteller who has then used storytelling, or as a pedagogical tool, brought books into the classroom in the most marvelous way. So it will be our pleasure to bring Deepta Vivekanand, who is the storyteller in residence at St. Kabir Public School, Chandigarh, to join us later in the show to talk about how and why stories make all the difference at school. Tara Veeraraghavan, good morning. Such a pleasure to see you here this morning. Like I said, that cheery good morning of yours always making us, pleased to kickstart a bazaar. I have a clutch of recommendations, and these are just a few. I mean, we've just picked a few books that we think would lend themselves beautifully in classroom contexts. There are several in Funky Rainbow's collection. Muttama says hello from the basement and cannot wait to hear Deepta. Muttama is managing and helming the pop-up bookshop at the basement of St. Kabir School, and I can see that she's helming it a little less just now as she is watching our bazaar. But really, who wouldn't want to listen to the marvelous Deepta Vivekanand speak about the power of stories and storytelling, not just in the real world, but not just in the world that we are familiar with, but in the classroom and at school, and as an important pedagogical tool. So we did, I had a chat with her to think of, and also with some of the teachers who walked into the pop up, and, to try to help them find the right kind of books for their requirements, gives us a better understanding of which books fit the bill in school a lot better than some of the others. I mean, we're not saying one is better than the other, and for each requirement, a different book, obviously. But it was just lovely to see what worked, what works for teachers, and how they pick books that they can use in a classroom situation. For our friends on Instagram and Facebook, many of you are aware that our website www.funkyrainbow.com has a whole host of books, up there. This one, the ones that we're recommending in this bazaar, and we can probably recommend about 10, 15 of them, but there's a lot more in our collection. So click on the tab that says Book Bazaar, www.funkyrainbow.com. Click on the tab that says Book Bazaar, and go to season 5. And Stories in the Classroom is one segment. You can see all the books that we've put into that collection there, many of which are in after discussions with teachers, with librarians, with academics who have absolutely found these books really relevant to use for students across different ages in the classroom. Shiraz, what a pleasure to see you here this morning. You're saying you're waiting to hear Deepta. She's a fabulous person and a brilliant storyteller. We couldn't agree more. I think there's a splendid storyfied atmosphere in Saint Kabir Public School, Chandigarh, simply because Deepta infuses her stories everywhere into the school. I'm going to get started with a clutch of recommendations before we invite Deepta to come and join us and make her recommendations, and also talk about, how stories, make a school a happier place. So what we did was we sort of split it subject wise. I mean, loosely, because these are all books that can be used in multiple contexts. But we decided, at least I felt, that one that we needed to start with is math, which was, at least for me, when was in school, which is many decades ago, a giant bugbear. Really, I mean, gosh, math used to petrify me until I started Funky Rainbow and started to look at the books in our collection that made math so much fun. I mean, and I was like, why didn't we have these wonderful books when we were growing up? So we're beginning with some recommendations on math. And the first one that I want to, share with you is this fantastic book by Lubena Bandukwala and Vinita Kanoria called Let's Do This Together: Math Stories to Solve. I mean, imagine, that title, right? Imagine how it's going to get you going when you know that, yes, you're studying fractions, or maybe you're studying algebra, or maybe you're doing trigonometry, but here are some math mysteries that you can solve, math in the form of stories that you can solve, and maybe understand some mathematical context. Some mathematical concepts. And that's exactly what the authors have done. In fact, we'd say this book would work for 6+ year olds. I mean, in the sense, grades 1, grades 2. I mean, these are all loose suggestions. I mean, these are suggestions sort of loosely based on age groups. But as teachers, as parents, as educators, you will have a better sense when you look at the books where you can fit them in. And really, sometimes I believe, we may say that this book works for grade 1 or grade 2, but I think even if you give it to a grade 7 student, it's something that they're going to enjoy thoroughly, because who wouldn't want to solve mysteries and understand math, that giant mystery, a lot better? Now, what have the authors done? They've put together a collection of stories that are divided into 3 categories. There's easy peasy stories, there's mostly easy stories, and there's not that easy stories. It's a great way to, so you can start. It's a really great way. And, they've picked, simple things. I mean, for instance, we all know that math is supposed to help us make sense of the world around us. For me, it didn't. But, there is a story which is in the most practical sense. How many mangoes would you need to make a jar of pickle? Such a practical question. And how do you calculate? How do you find out? Really, right? So they have broken up the segments into, like I said, easy peasy, which are simple addition and, sets and, simple concepts that are explained by the easy peasy stories. The slightly tougher ones moving to, a more advanced context. I mean, more advanced concepts, and the not so easy stories really moving to concepts of algebra, of, a set theory, and just a whole bunch of things that you are teaching your children right through their academic years. Now, this is a book that I think helps build self confidence, really helps demystify math in very, very wonderful ways. And we would absolutely recommend it for teachers that are doing, starting from grade one, I think easily going up to grades six or seven. The next recommendation, I can see Ritvika Roy. I realized that after I left school and math behind me, that grammar is also a form of math. It has all meanings and equations, and stories go haywire if the grammar does too. Absolutely. That's a context that makes perfect sense to me. Bad grammar means haywire ideas in my head. Similarly, I think if your math fundas are not good, and it's just remarkable how many of us have grown up fearing math. There's no reason whatsoever that young people today need to be in that place at all. I mean, and I'm sure you'll agree with me, Ritvika, that there's absolutely no need to fear math when there are such marvelous books available for children and adults and educators to use and demystify difficult concepts. And difficult is just, a matter of getting the grammar right. If you have the grammar right, then the concept unravels itself really well. My next recommendation on this theme, Muttama, is of course making fun. Bad grammar means Vidya marks a zero. Absolutely, yes. You get your first, pronouns or articles or, punctuation wrong. And I'm sure my guest today agrees, because we've seen much of her communication with us, which is so bothered. She's so bothered about the P's and the Q's and the commas that it makes it a pleasure to sort of work with her, simply because everything that needs to be communicated is communicated perfectly. And I can't tell you how much of a pleasure it is to work with someone who gets the grammar right. So Deepta gets 100 on 100 on that count for sure. She's sitting right here and giggling away, but she knows as much as we do that she's really bothered about her grammar. Now, the next one that we wanted to recommend is a fairly new book in our collection. It is Arundhati Venkatesh's Ramanujan, From Zero to Infinity. Fabulously illustrated by Priya Kurian, and meant for 9, 10+ year olds. It's a biography, but not a biography from start to finish, from the time that Ramanujan was a young boy till he was grown up, but something that takes a peek into his life in school. I mean, we all learn about Srinivasa Ramanujan. I mean, anybody that goes to school has to study Ramanujan. But this biography tells us what made him the mathematical genius that he was. I mean, obviously, many things, including his school, nurturing him to become the genius that he became. But the context, the place in which Arundhati sets the story, like where Ramanujan was born, his friends, his the area where he lived, the community that sort of surrounded him, and the trials and tribulations of a young boy, a young genius boy in school. She does such a fabulous job of recreating, his early life. And it gives us a wonderful insight because, after all, understanding a tough mathematical concept, a concept that somebody came up with, is as much as you have to pay attention to understanding that theory or that context, that concept, you can also sort of go back into their life to figure out what made them who they are. And the nice thing about this book, and the reason we've put it in, is there are many puzzles for readers to solve as they go along, the kind of puzzles that Ramanujan himself solved as a young boy. So, of course, Ramanujan wants to go to school, and the only reason he wants to go to school is exactly the reason that I didn't want to go to school, is because he wants to do math. And unfortunately, that year when he's just sort of bursting with mathematical ideas in his head, there is no math teacher in class, alas and alack, for the whole year, mind you. All right, so we're just hoping that there are not that many those kinds of schools anymore. Now, instead, there are substitutes, and we all know sometimes these substitute periods, they just make you do the most bizarre things. And in Ramanujan's case, of course, what the substitutes make him do is to lift iron ingots. Can you even believe that? Measure milk, pour milk from one container to another to measure it, jump from one island to another, and even fry fish. Crikes. Substitution period. I think we need to get our act together a lot better on that one, really, right? Now, all Ramanujan wants to do is to sink his teeth into good math. And, there's also a contest. I mean, the Kumbakonam Crackerjacks, which is the team that Ramanujan is a part of, has, gotten into a math challenge with the triumphant trio, which are three math whizzes from another school. And the Kumbakonam Crackerjacks, that has Ramanujam as part of it, absolutely wants to win. What are they going to do? No math teacher. You're lifting ingots in school and making fried fish, but you've got to win this competition. I mean, it's filled with rollicking humor. There are tons of lovely puns and, of course, beautiful illustrations by Priya Kurian. I mean, she can really bring alive a book so fabulously well. I mean, and the life of one of the world's greatest mathematicians, the young life of one of the world's greatest mathematicians, coming alive in this book, which we think many math teachers and teachers from other subjects will enjoy considerably. Ritvika saying, Varsha Session's Clockwala's Clues is a great book to learn how to calculate time. Absolutely. It's not on our main list of recommendations, but it is in the Buzzaar link, Ritvika. What a wonderful book about a bunch of kids that want to, save some stray dogs, and what their clockwala uncle does, how he sets them contests that have to be fulfilled in a particular span of time, giving you a great way to teach the concept of time. From math, we move to science. And, I have a lovely picture book which came out many years ago by a writer whom we love at Funky Rainbow, Rupa Pai. This one is Bonda and Devi, written by Rupa and illustrated by Jeet Chaudhary. Now, what is lovely about this book is that on the face of it, it is about two friends, Devi and Bonda. But as you start reading, the book, and it's, Bonda and Devi are just two friends. Now, do two friends have to like exactly the same things? Do they have to want to do exactly the same things? Do they have to hate exactly the same things? Well, once you start reading the book, you realize that Devi is a little girl, but Bonda is her robo friend. And what a great way, it is to introduce the youngest of readers to the concept of robots. Like, what are they? What are these mechanized, beings that we create in order to help us, make our life simpler? It's a lovely picture book story. And I know, in school this time at St. Kabir, when Sham and I did a workshop on creating the pages of a magazine. The eighth graders put together the pages of a magazine across a 6-hour workshop, and there was a gadget review segment, and both the gadgets that the students chose to review were robotic in nature. One team picked robotic waiters. Obviously, they are fascinated by the concept of robots, and robots doing just about anything. What with Chat GPT sort of playing an all-pervading role in our life. I'm hoping that I can keep that far and away from my own life, but still, the things that robots can do, the things that artificial intelligence can do for you, is a subject that fascinates young people. And this picture book, which I say would be, is absolutely meant for readers 6, 7 plus, certainly, in the context of a friendship, between Bonda and Devi, between Devi and Bonda. And as you turn the pages, you realize that Bonda is a robot, and what a robot actually is, and what a robot can do for all of us. It's a lovely picture book, a lovely book of science, actually, tucked away inside this wonderful story of friendship. And of course, on a similar vein, a book that I thoroughly enjoyed reading, Topi Rockets from Tumba by Menaka Raman, and illustrated by Anada Menon. Now, this is a fabulous story, really, because the little place off the coast of Kerala, Tumba, playing such a significant role in the development of India's, foray into space. And in this book, what Menaka Raman does is to tell us the story of Tumba, of what happens at Tumba, through the eyes of an inquisitive young girl called Mary. Mary is all of 9 years old. She's very happy, but she's also bored that there's nothing exciting or interesting happens in Tumba. Now, that's of course until Dr. Vikram Sarabhai, the spaceman of India, lands up in Tumba with his team and with the mission to launch India's first rocket into space. The scientists, Dr. Vikram Sarabhai and his team of scientists who arrive in Tumba way back many decades ago, right? To undertake what at that point was considered an audacious adventure for India, that is launching our first ever rocket into space. Now, it is, such a great way of telling a story. It's fact, of course, because we know that India's first rocket launch happened at Tumba. But there's young Mary, through whose eyes this account is sort of narrated, of the weeks and the months prior to the launching of the rocket. And it's a great example of how a scientific concept, or of a scientific journey, for instance, can be narrated as a story. And I'm sure many kids are likely to remember this story, of India's first ever rocket launch. Of the humble beginnings of our great big space adventure. This is probably a great way for them to remember it over and above reading it as sort of some dreary text in our textbooks. So those were two recommendations, in for science, and there are a plenty. In fact, I would love for you to share your, suggestions. I know many of you who watch are, educators, library educators. You run book clubs for children. I can see Nidhi Agarwal here. Good morning. And you say it sounds very interesting. It is absolutely such an interesting book. of something that's a significant development in India's space history, but once narrated as a story, just becomes something that you will never ever forget. I mean, a lot of credit for to Menaka Raman for narrating it, of course, that fabulously well. So there are a lot of books, and I'm sure many of you use them in various contexts. I would love for you to share books that you have used, that you have found, the stories of which have lent it themselves very well to some kind of educational development. I mean, and it doesn't really have to strictly be in a school context, right? Education happens everywhere and anywhere. So if you share those titles, and if there are some of those that we've missed putting into our collection, we will gladly add it into our collection of stories in the classroom. I then move on to a favorite subject. At least it used to be for me. I know it's for a lot of people, history, because the very word history has story in it. And if only we told our history as remarkable stories, we would never have students sort of breaking their heads over dates and names and places and people if it was narrated as some kind of like a story that sort of holds things together. I'm sure our children or students would never ever forget it, would never ever think that history was a dreary, dull, boring subject. There's no need whatsoever for it to be one. I can see, Nidhi, you say Anna's extraordinary experiments with the weather, absolutely right up there in our collection. And from the Dreamers series, the Janaki Ammal biography, absolutely also up in our collection. Some of these books we've recommended very often in our bazaars. So we're focusing on books that we may not have spotlighted earlier. Some we have, many of what we've put into the bazaar today, we haven't. Sunila Kulkarni Gupte, hello Vidya and Team Funky Rainbow, you say. Such a pleasure. So reassuring always to get your hello, Sunila, because we're like, okay, she's watching, and I know she's going to tell a whole bunch of kids that she opens out her collection of books to in her apartment complex about all these wonderful books and all the wonderful ones that she has in her collection. So in the context of history, two fairly new books, I mean, by the sisters Shruti Garodia and Archana Garodia Gupta. I mean, you do know them. They've done the children's history, a history of India for children in two parts. Now these are two brand new books. I'm assuming it's going to be a series, but there's Chandragupta Maurya and the Greek onslaught, and there's Akbar and the agents of the East. Now, what are these books about? Of course, it's about Chandragupta, and of course, it's about Akbar. I mean, two famous rulers who did so much in India, essentially. But in these books, right, it's a set of four kids. There's Zoya, there's Noor, there's Ansh, and Rohan, and they have a pet elephant called Elfu. They're super, adorable elephant companion called Elfu. And these are kids in the contemporary context. In fact, in the context of Chandragupta Maurya, the kids and their companion, they are enjoying a picnic by a picturesque waterfall in Goa, and suddenly, out of the blue, they are flung back 2 millennia, to the time when Alexander of Macedonia absolutely decided to march and conquer the world. We are in a school, folks, and there's a lot of drum beats, and there's obviously some practice going on, but that's perfectly okay. We are just going to add to all the noise in any case, really. Sunila, you're saying that they're fabulous books by them. Love the two sisters. Yes, absolutely. These are brand new ones. I think it's barely been a month or month and a half since the two of them have come. Since the two of these have been released. So here they go back in time to Takshila and to to the conquests of of Alexander of Macedonia, and you travel back in time as a reader. I mean, instead of just reading about Chandragupta Maurya and everything that he did and how he managed to stop, Alexander in his tracks, here you time travel with kids. With these four children and their elephant companion, and you absolutely get a new, fresh perspective on a historical figure. Much like, it's exactly in the same vein that the book on Akbar is modeled. Same thing, the same four kids and their elephant companion. Suddenly, they are, go time travel, back many, many centuries, and they are taken prisoners 450 years ago by a mighty ruler. You need to find out why that happens. Why are they why do they land in the court of the powerful Mughal emperor Akbar? And what happens, why are they taken prisoners, and what happens, in the course of which you definitely will find out about the entire reign of Akbar and the different things that Emperor Akbar did, as a ruler. So great, great way. And it's written in a nice, kind of chatty, casual style, which I think will appeal to young readers very, very much. We'd say 9+ year olds will enjoy these new books. And I think there are many more, because there are, of course, at the end of the book, some fact pages. You can see they call it the fact tracker, and there's must know information about the Mughal period and about Chandragupta Maurya in the other book. These are books that I think children that are 9+ will absolutely enjoy, going up to whatever age that you want to study. Even us completely grown up obsolete children enjoying these books thoroughly. And the next one that I recommended, and I've loved reading this so much because I knew so little about this part of our history. This is Gayatri Ponvarnan's The Vanguards of Azad Hind. I mean, I absolutely, knew very little myself about the Azad Hind Forge, set up by Subhash Chandra Bose. I mean, we do know that that he set up an army that wanted to march and win India its freedom. We also knew, maybe to some extent, that he had an entire women's army as part, a women's contingent as part of this army. And that is where this book is set in 1943, where Kyle, a young 16-year-old freedom fighter, she takes part in all kinds of little things that she can do in her own little town. Protest marches, she burns British goods, and sabotages trains, all of this without her family knowing that she's doing this. I mean, they don't know that Kyle is, an underground freedom fighter, and she prefers to keep it that way until, and she thinks she's the only one in her family that does this, until one day, by complete surprise, she discovers that her aunt Uma is also a freedom fighter. In fact, she's a soldier in the INA. That is being led by Subhash Chandra Bose. And Kyle decides to join her. She thinks that it's just a marvelous stroke of luck that her aunt Uma is part of the freedom struggle too, and her aunt helps her become part of a recruitment camp, to see if she can make her way into the Indian National Army. Now, for Kyle, freedom meant, the little things that she was doing in her own town or village, in her own little town. That is, like I said, burning British products and, being part of protest marches. But when she gets recruited into the INA, the war becomes a horrifying reality, which all wars indeed are. And I got so much information about the women's contingent of the Indian National Army, about how the army marched through Southeast Asia into India in an effort to win us our freedom. It's the best kind of fiction that there can be, to teach you about some things that maybe your history textbooks don't do any justice to at all. I mean, of course, I'm not saying this is true of all textbooks. Maybe there are great textbooks, but reading this book of fiction, and we'd recommend this for slightly older readers, because I think you're over 12 maybe when you're learning about the Indian National Army, really, and Subhash Chandra Bose's role in our freedom struggle. So we would recommend this, for older readers, and for all adults and teachers interested in history. From history, and I'm going to keep a watch of the time, because I know Deepta has some fantastic recommendations for us as well today. One of those fabulous storytellers who knows the world of books so well that she's able to bring the two of them together in the best possible way. So I must save some time for her own recommendations. I know we put out geography as one of the subjects because it's such a huge bugbear. Much like math, I figured many kids, just feel that geography is such a pain, really, when it absolutely need not be at all, really. Latitudes, longitudes, reading maps. I mean, when we were growing up, these were things that you routinely did. I mean, I know, you had, I think, the people growing up in our times looked at an atlas practically every week. I know every holiday that I went on, my dad gave me a TTK map of that place that we were traveling to, and he said he was not going to be able to drive to that place if my brother and I didn't chart the route from Bangalore to wherever that we were planning to go. So, really, finding places on the map when they say, look between this latitude and this longitude, was not that confounding. I understand that we live in the world of Google Maps right now, and maybe that makes geography more challenging. So, here's a wonderful book that makes the geography of India, that storyfies the geography of India in wonderful ways. I can see Sunila saying, with their live stories. So I must tell you, my friend's father was in the INA. Wow. He was half Japanese and a great follower of Subhash Chandra Bose. He was jailed. So I have got to get this book for her from FR. You have got to tell us these stories. I mean, you are so full of fabulous stories, Sunila. You have got to make a visit and, talk to us. I mean, imagine having a friend who was in the INA. I mean, practically knew nothing of the INA till I read the Vanguards of Azad Hind. And I'm determined to have you, when we're back in Bangalore and hopefully static for like at least 2 weeks in the same city, we will invite you to the office and have you regale us with these stories. What a wonderful anecdote. And sure, we have copies of the book at FR. Just tell us whom you want us to send the book to, and we will certainly send it off. So, Gods, Giants, and the Geography of India by Nalini Ramachandran, telling you stories, stories of how a majestic mountain range emerges to quell a demon's tantrum. Now, when the mountain emerges, I mean, the lovely part of this book is that she's telling you these stories. Some of them are mythological, some of them are fantasy, some of them are fable. But you get to know so much about the geography of the country. What was that mountain? Does it exist in the north of India still? I mean, a great way to demystify geography for young readers. In the west of India, there's a sea, that she tells the story of a sea that keeps its secret, and, its secret, which is a city. sort of safely under its waters. Which is this city? Does it still exist today? Why did the sea sort of cover that city? What a great book, you know. I mean, really zigzagging between myth, fable, fantasy, and telling you wonderful stories which are in essence. And you can see that, you know, the book is so nicely formatted, okay, zigzagging between all these stories to actually unravel the science behind the geography of India. I mean, you know, even I think just to point us to our seas, to our rivers, to our mountains, to the oceans, to the plateaus and the plains via stories, Nalini Ramachandran does a great job of, uncovering the geography of India in, you know, just through stories that you would never, I mean, I wouldn't have thought. Some of the stories are familiar, we have heard them from our parents or grandparents, maybe teachers, but you know that that story contains some nugget of geography inside it is a wonderful way to show how stories can make geography very, very exciting. Sunila is saying, also Vidya, he was half Muslim, and that is how India was, inclusive of every religion. So you're talking about the friend in the INA, I'm assuming, half Japanese and half Muslim, is that correct? Wow, I mean, what a fascinating story to tell, honestly, Sunila. Very little time left now, so I will let Deepta tell us a lot more, make some of her fantastic recommendations before I just close with civics, that subject which, I mean, which I have to say, it just drove me to tears at school. Like, right? I'm like, God, I don't want to know that we had a legislative assembly and we had a judiciary and we had, and you were just mugging up stuff about elections, about about democracy, democratic processes. And I'm like, my God, is there a better way? I mean, at that time, I didn't know any better. But today, my God, the kinds of books we have that bring alive the stories of our constitution, the stories of democracy. I'm just quickly going to point you to two. One of them, Jamlo Walks, which is the story of a young migrant worker called Jamlo who walked all the way from the chili fields of Telangana to Chhattisgarh when the COVID lockdown hit us. Now, what happens to Jamlo is not a happy story at all. It's what happened to all the migrant workers. Absolutely not a happy story at all. I mean, it is a nation's shame that, millions of people were asked to walk simply because they had to get home. Now, how can you use this in the context of civics? Well, you're teaching the children about the Constitution of India. What about the fact that the Constitution believes that we are all equal citizens? I mean, what a great way to pick up a story, to talk about how inequality of the country was just showcased. I mean, it was spotlighted, and how, I mean, just because we had money, we could stay at home, we had the food that we needed to eat, we could order what we needed to from our local kirana stores. But what about the people who didn't have all of those things? They just had to walk home. I mean, really, what a great way to ask questions about those basic tenets of the Constitution that, all of us as citizens should know, should work to safeguard. That's what I mean by saying that there are spectacular books that absolutely can be used to illustrate so many contexts in civil life. I mean, we're all citizens of this country. We have rights, but we also have responsibilities. There are duties that each one of us need to do to ensure that we live in an egalitarian country. And I think some of these stories, including the last one that I had, which I picked because it was in the form of a play. And I know that schools are often interested in plays. This is The Boy Who Wrote a Constitution, a play for children on human rights. It of course takes you through the life of Dada Saheb Ambedkar, of Bal Saheb Ambedkar, Bala Saheb Ambedkar, and it at the same time questions us on why he was pushed to write, to sort of helm the forming of a document that ensured equality for all. We know Ambedkar came from a different caste. We know how he was treated in school, and we know that the scourge of caste still persists in India today. And this book, which sort of dramatizes the life of Bhimrao Ambedkar, absolutely is a great way to have students look at the constitution as a document that protects everybody's rights. I mean, these are Mutama is telling me that copy must come to the pop-up. The school is picking it up. Of course, Mutama absolutely insisting that the school must have this book, and to write it in play form. It's very it's a form that lends itself very well to being used in the classroom. A play moves from one act to the next, because there's so much dialogue, and I think children read this form a lot more easily. I mean, and there are many anecdotes where you see the life of Bhimrao Ambedkar, and you understand what spurred him to become a champion of equality in the eyes of the constitution. I mean, in the eyes of law, everybody had to be equal. So these are just some of our recommendations. There are tons of them. I'm sure each one of you who's commenting and watching has several books that you've used in various contexts. We would love for you to share that information with us. It just makes us look at all these books through newer and newer eyes. And I'm going to, of course, I mean, I'm done with my recommendations. I know Deepta has some splendid ones. So let's just say hello to Deepta, who's actually just waiting right in the next room to join us at the bazaar today. I can see Sunila saying, I would love to come to FR. What an honor. It's our honor, Sunila. Yes. Okay. My stream? Okay. Okay. So Sham says, you want me to change the camera? Okay, I can see Sunila saying there's also the Bhimayana. Yes, we have that in our collection. I'm afraid we don't have copies of the book at FR at the moment. I'm finding it quite hard to get Navayana's books at the moment, but I'm hoping we'll be able to make amends. And Avyuk saying, good morning, Auntie. I just had an exam yesterday on the Constitution of India and about democracy. My teacher made us enact the scene of how the Constitution was formed, and I was able to give more because of these books. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Avyuk. And here we are welcoming one person who has done this. Certainly in the school that we are hosting the bazaar from today, we'd like all of you to put your hands together for Deepta Vivekanand from St. Kabir Public School, Chandigarh.
Where's the camera? Which camera? There are so many cameras. Hello.
All right, hello. And Shams, of course, given me some confusing bit of instructions. I wish he would write a book that made it easier for me to understand what he wants me to do. He's like, please switch off this camera and log back in again. Is it? Yes, Sham? Yes, should I or not? Yes. Okay, okay. Uh, okay, so you want me to close this Be Live stream? Okay, done. stream, Sham? Okay, and we are back with Deepta right here joining us this morning. Thank you for giving us, space in your school to run a Lit Fest
Thank you so
right
much. No,
through this
it's
week.
been fabulous. It's just been fabulous. It's been a week of so many things that have happened to get this festival off the ground,
Yes.
and we're on the last day. I can't believe it's over.
Yes, I think we're going to the euphoric high. I don't know how
Yeah.
we're going to come down, from that.
Absolutely.
Thank you also for lending us your room. As you
My
can see,
pleasure.
we have absolutely taken
over.
the
Yes.
school in every way. But Deepta, one thing that was absolutely evident right through this week at school is what is your role in bringing stories to the classroom. And I know, that storybooks and storytelling is something that, absolutely gets you going, much more than textbooks and rote learning. Tell us why and tell us a little bit about the power of storytelling.
Oh dear, I wish I had growing up when, the time when I was in school, that I had just books instead of textbooks.
Absolutely.
Because I think anything and everything I learned came from the books that I had back at home and that I
Okay.
took back home from the library, from the school library, of course. And the textbook sort of became just the supplemental sort of reader that I had to go to, only because I had to write exams and that had to come from the textbook.
All right.
But I think anything that I still continue to have an interest in was because of the things that I read and the stories that were told to me. I was very fortunate to have, uh, parents, grandparents who had such diverse interests that they sort of helped me connect the dots and look at how everything is interconnected and not just as science and math and language.
Absolutely.
So I think that sort of stayed with me. And when I eventually became a storyteller and an educator, which was just not planned at all, but sort of stumbled onto it, I realized that that was just the way to do it. I don't know if there is any other way that would work, really. Because also now I know scientifically as well that storytelling is so, it is so inherent to the human condition. We are constantly communicating in stories. What else are we doing?
That's right.
And why should the classroom therefore be any different? Because that is where communication is playing out every single second. So stories naturally become, your go-to tool. And one also can look into history for enough evidence of, the Panchatantra and various
Absolutely.
other stories that were used to sort of promote facts, learning. I mean, they learn things like warfare and strategy and all of that through simple
stories.
animal stories,
Yeah.
like through jackals and talking tigers and whatnot, right?
Absolutely.
So why not in the classroom? Yeah.
I know, and yet, the school is perhaps the only place where we've sort of,
Yeah.
really pushed stories. I mean, maybe not true anymore, but, really for a large, number of years, stories were simply just considered quite frivolous. Although, it is said, in fact, I was reading up a bit on stories, and, it says that the teacher and the storyteller sort of share a similar purpose. I mean, their job is to communicate in the most memorable way possible, right? And there was this author who, and that's why I picked out this quote. The author Gail Goodwin, who said, "Good teaching is one fourth preparation and three fourths theater or storytelling." Essentially, right? So, in this context, really, what makes stories the best resource for a teacher?
I'm not so sure I agree with the proportion.
You should be.
It's definitely not one fourth preparation. I think a lot of it is in the preparation.
Right.
So I would still say, yeah, 50-50
50.
perhaps. Yeah, not one fourth and three fourth for sure. So see, stories help you develop that emotional connection with the subject first, and I think that's what's most important. The concept can be so dry, and it can be just so boring if it's presented as it is. and the brain sort of rejects facts. It's wired to reject facts and accept story. We know that again from neuroscience research. So none of this is just anecdotal evidence that we're talking about, right? So there is enough sort of fact-based, evidence-based knowledge that we can draw upon, and that makes the case for using stories a lot stronger, especially now. And also, we have, perhaps earlier we did not have enough resources to go to, but today we do. We have books that have been written specifically for concepts to make them more engaging. So I think it's now really the onus is on the educator to go looking for those resources. That's also part of the work, which is why it's not 1/4.
1/4, yes. Or you can call it Funky Rainbow.
Yes,
you can,
or we
of
could
course.
call Funky Rainbow and say, give us a curated collection of books for math, science, geography, whatever, and it shall be delivered. So I think the moment you go into a classroom and say that I'm going to tell you a story, no matter what it is, it can be a badly told story, but I can assure you the children will still listen. They will listen and tell you, I didn't like the story, but they will have definitely listened. So I think that's the power of packaging something in the form of a story. And then letting the facts sort of emerge out of it. I like to call it facts through fantasy.
So lovely, yeah.
Yeah. So let the learning emerge. Let the story be in the center of the learning experience, or let the book be in the center of the learning experience. So the pedagogy that I have sort of put together over the years is tell, discuss, connect, and extend.
Wow. Tell, discuss, connect, and extend.
Yeah.
Lovely.
So it very simply is tell the story or share a story, and the story can be in any form, really. It can be an oral story, a folk tale, a fable, myth, legend, whatever. It could be a newspaper article. It could be a scene from a film. It could be poetry. Any form of story, really. Present that. Talk about it a little bit with the kids. Draw out the questions and the responses from them. Then connect it to your textbook. So the textbook is going to play an important role. We cannot do away with them.
Yes.
But the idea is to sort of flip this around and not bring the textbook in first, but put something else that is more engaging and more lively, and then connect it with the fact, and then extend it into activities, make cross-curricular connections, interdisciplinary connections, and so on and so forth. So,
yeah. I wish I could come back to school. I really wouldn't mind being in school at the moment, seeing what you do to make the sort of the whole educational experience so much more enriching. In fact, you when you were just talking about it now, I've been in many schools where now I find teachers are ready to give their children books, which are not textbooks, which means they'll give them, storybooks that they can read. But very few of them actually go on to perform, to tell it, and I wonder, I suppose it takes, a lot to be able to perform a story in front of an audience. But do you think the oral narrative it's probably way more powerful than, a child, just reading some books, right? And I know you had picked some recommendations today for a couple of those subjects.
Right.
Some of those stories you say you've narrated yourself.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. Oral stories, you look at folklore, it survived today because of the strong oral component. We've documented them in the form of books, but the original story was oral.
That's right.
There's no telling who narrated the story at what time. We keep hearing versions and retellings of the same story. So that's the power of orality, I think. As someone who grew up with grandparents who always had stories to share, I think I believe in oral stories a whole lot, because I still remember, I can recall the voice, and it's not just the voice, but also all the other sort of sensory elements that went along with it. what was cooking at that time, perhaps, or
Absolutely.
what the weather was like. It's just amazing how you can recall all of that imagery, and it's not just listening to the story, but everything along with it.
That's right.
So the visual, sort of, if you put the visual in first, I think that cuts out the opportunity for a child or for a human being to really imagine, for themselves. So that's where oral stories certainly come in. So today, I think one of the oral stories that stayed with me for a long, long time is the story of how to weigh an elephant.
That's right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it is a picture book now, right? By
Yes,
Katha.
it is.
Yeah,
Sham, we
yeah.
have that picture book
Right,
up, isn't
right.
it? Yes.
So it's actually a Chinese folktale, interestingly, about a little boy called Cao Cao.
That's
Sorry,
right.
Cao Chong, whose father was Cao Cao, and I have to get the Chinese pronunciations right. So this is a story that was set in the Wu Kingdom.
That's right.
And it turns out that they had received the gift of an elephant, and in China they had not seen an elephant before. And surprise, surprise, the elephant came all the way from India.
You know where?
Yes. So there was this majestic beast in the courtyard one day, and nobody knew where it had come from, or just the size of it. They were going around looking at its from different angles, and suddenly somebody said, "I wonder how much this weighs, and can we have it weighed?" And then one of the ministers say that, "Oh, we don't have scales that big to weigh an elephant. We've never weighed anything so big ever." But the emperor wanted to know, so the emperor's order had to be obeyed, and so it sent all the prime ministers and all the advisors into an absolute tizzy and a tailspin. So they're going around trying to understand how to do this, until this little boy, Sao Chong, goes up to his father Cao Cao and whispers in his ear that, "I think I may have the solution." And his father says, "Oh, a little boy like you," first dismisses him because he's little, but once he listens to him, he says, "Wow, yes, that does make sense. Let's try it." And so the next day, they all go off to the riverbank with a big wooden boat. And the boy says, "Bring the elephant and lower it into the boat." The boat is moored to the bank. And once the elephant is, lowered into the boat, obviously he also gets into the boat. And the water level, the boat sinks a little bit.
Right.
And at the point where the water meets the boat, he says, "Bring a knife, bring a knife." And so the advisor is running towards him with a knife, and he says, "Make a line where the water meets the boat," right? And then he says, "Now take away the elephant and bring stones." So, and once the elephant is taken away from the boat, the obviously the line goes higher.
Yes.
Yeah. And when the stones are lowered in, he says, "Stop," at a point where the line meets the water again.
Ah,
So now the boat is
clever.
filled with many, many, many stones and is sunk to the same level as it was when it held the elephant. And then he says, "Now take the stones and weigh the stones one by one." Now, surely they have scales enough to weigh stones. And so the sum of all the pebbles that were sunk in the boat, and he subtracts his own weight.
Ah, clever.
Remember,
boy.
he was also on the boat. Yeah, so
Clever
he weighs
boy.
about 49 jin or something like that. Jin was the measurement in those days. So he subtracts that from the total, and he says, "Well, do you know how much the elephant weighs? Not 20, not 50, not 1,000, but 9,398 jin."
Wow.
That's the weight of an elephant. And so the story ends, and everybody is thrilled, and they say that, Sao Chong is the most brilliant boy that they have in the kingdom, and so on and so forth. But this is actually a story not just about how to weigh an elephant, but about buoyancy, about units of measurement. I mean, you can extend it
displacement
however.
and
Yes,
right.
so many things. Yeah, weights and measures certainly for the younger grades, but you can also connect it to Archimedes' principle and the principle of buoyancy, and there's just so many connections that you can make.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
How very wonderful, right? That one story
Yeah.
can, get can be used in so many wonderful
Yes.
ways in the
Yes.
classroom,
Yes.
really, right?
Absolutely.
There is a companion story, or rather the same story done by another publisher, How to Weigh Appukutan,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
That comes
Yes.
out from
Absolutely.
Ekalavya,
Yes.
which case, there's a witty princess, a wise and witty princess whom everybody dismisses because she's a young child,
Child,
who
yeah.
does exactly the same
Yes.
thing to
Yes.
weigh.
Yeah, I'm going to put you back on.
Okay.
Three, two,
And we are back, friends on Instagram. Thank you for being patient till for the stream to come back up again. And I can see some comments coming in. Nidhi saying, "Wow, this is wonderful! Really, the way Deepta tells the story." And Sunila saying, "Thank you for telling us the story, Deepta. I just loved hearing it. I hope the video is not paused now. I hope the audio is back in
We're all good.
properly."
Yes.
And yeah, we're all back up again. Now, the thing though is, I mean, like I said, stories are sort of kindling the power of imagination, giving you a context to so many things. Yet, in an educational institution, there are educational objectives that need to be met, right?
Yes.
How do you think the twain can meet? Like, how do you think teachers and many of the people watching are book clubs and people who run book clubs, they are librarians, they're people who help kids get into reading, really, right? How do you think the stories can be used to meet educational objectives and to make assessments
Right.
with
Yeah.
students?
That's such an important question, Vidya. So this is where the romance of telling a story becomes about, okay, now how do we make this work every day? How do we bring it into the lesson plan? How do we fit in curricular objectives? So this is where your table has to have everything laid out in front of you. So typically, I look at the textbooks, and I look at all the concepts, the themes that are emerging out of those each of those subjects and those lessons, and being in touch with the world of books and stories is an important factor. You need to keep yourself constantly up to date about what's happening and the kind of books that are out in the market. So, which is when, this book, this is just so wonderful. It's The People of Indus. It's an absolutely new book.
Fantastic one, yeah.
This book could very easily, this is the camera. People of the Indus by Nikhil Gulati and Jonathan Mark Kinoya. He's the professor who assisted him in the research for this book. So if you look at the 6th grade history textbook, the NCERT CBSE textbook is called Our Pasts. And the very first lesson is about about civilizations. So you know straight away that there's a match. Now, the thing is, how do you use this book alongside the lesson? Because you do need the textbook for documentation purposes. The child has a notebook to write in and all of those things. But it immediately strikes you that, hey, here's this book that I think I can use very well with this lesson. So let me see, if not the whole book, can I at least use excerpts from the book? Right. And in fact, the section in the lesson about what are the features of the Harappan civilization are so beautifully explained in this book. If I can just show it up.
Lovely to see the
page number
pages.
43. I memorized that. So there are 3 points essentially. So it talks about how power was decentralized, and look at this book. It's in the form of a graphic novel. Fabulously illustrated. I mean, a textbook is not going to go into so much detail.
Absolutely.
Right? No large-scale warfare, and miniaturized art and monumental cities. Now, just look at that. What I love about this book is how he's drawing comparisons between other early civilizations. He talks about how when kings and emperors from other civilizations were busy, making these huge monuments in glory of themselves and, to outdo their lifetime. Here was the Harappan civilization that was looking at things in really small, scaled down versions. And there was no sense of anything large. It seems there was no one human or god at the center of it all. I mean, what a powerful line.
Right.
And no textbook is going to give you this line.
Yeah, no way.
Right. So this section actually replaces the section in the textbook beautifully, gives a lot more detail for the students. So just drawing their attention to these things, like, how the city is laid out and so on and so forth. I think this is where the teacher can digress a little bit. It might take you 15-20 minutes more to do that, but it's well worth spending that time taking the child's attention to this aspect of the lesson. And it's certainly going to stick a lot more, because there are so many other little things, little references that are happening, that are being talked about. So really, it's the job of the educator, and it helps if there is somebody who is in a sort of supporting role or in a specialist role. Schools today, I think, are making the effort to bring in people who come from a slightly different, not a regular teacher background,
That's right.
but somebody who's connected with books and stories in different ways, and look at how you can collaborate with the teacher and say that, hey, he has this really new book, and I think you're going to find this very useful, and this is how I think it can be used. But this has to be a team effort.
Right.
It cannot be one person's thing to do. And that's what I think over the years we've been able to do at Saint Kabir, is that whenever there's a new book or a story that I think will click, because by now I know the curriculum quite well.
That's right.
I go running to the teacher and say, here's this story, here's this book, why don't you take a look at it? And then we sit down and try and make a lesson plan together, where we can fit this story either at the beginning, the middle, or the end as a conclusion, or try and turn that entire chapter itself into a project, so that, we'll see if we can get each child a copy of this book. That would be great. But at least one section, can do it at one point in time, and then we can sort of repeat the same thing with the other sections. So there's a lot of planning, Vidya. There's a lot of planning. There's a lot of logistics that has to be.
I can imagine, because you have to fit into into a calendar, right, of things. But
and to answer your question about, in today's context about the NEP does actually put a lot of focus on storytelling and reading.
You
So
told me that. You
yeah,
said, I was
yeah,
quite surprised to
yeah,
know,
yeah.
right? And you said CBSE is,
Yes.
bringing in
Yes.
storytelling as pedagogy
They
in a
are
big
in
way.
a big way, So story pedagogy is not something that was a good to have any longer.
Mhm.
It is being positioned as a must have. So I think it's time that everybody sort of woke up and took it a lot more seriously.
Mhm.
And I'm hoping that that will mean more people going into schools with books and stories, and playing a more supportive role. So yeah, I guess make the case for that.
Yes, and the case is very, very well made indeed, Deepta. The thing is, I want to ask, so there is, you play that supportive role, and you are straddling two worlds. I mean, it's the teacher's concern is genuine.
Yes.
There's X amount of portions that need to
Yes.
get covered.
Yes.
If a child has to finish studying something academically across a particular year, that has to get done, really, right? So when you bring in these books that you're sort of recommending, and whatever we've put into this bazaar as well, you are actually finding ways to fit the two in together. Tell me, I mean, how easy is it to persuade a teacher to tell a story over giving a lecture on a particular subject, and what do you really need to do? I mean, and all the people watching, right, we're all adults and educators in some way or the other, really, right? So
Yes.
what does that take? I mean, what are those tips or tricks up your sleeve that make you turn educators, that helps you get educators to tell stories rather than give a lecture?
Yeah, so I think it's important to offer a wide range of stories and take away the pressure of performing. See, there's a difference between telling a
Right.
story as performance and wedging it into your lesson. Yeah, that doesn't have to be dramatized. You don't have to have props. You don't have to do too much prep, as long as you know what the story is and where you need to bring it in. So but of course, tell it in an engaging way.
Mhm.
There's no shying away from the fact that communication skills have to be exceptional when you're in the classroom, right?
Mhm, mhm.
Teaching is storytelling, after all.
Absolutely.
So I think what's important is to understand when to bring in the story
Mhm.
and how to tell it in a simple yet effective manner,
Mhm.
without the bells and whistles.
Right.
So the performative element is not something that I stress upon so much, and I figured that along as I went along. This is what, my 6th year in school now, almost.
Mhm.
So it's not about getting the children to do your refrains or your call and response. Yeah, it's
Got it.
great if you can do that, if you can pull it off. Yes, by all means. But can you tell your own life story, or just even if you're recounting an anecdote from your life, or something that may have happened to you in the morning on your way to school, and if you think that there is a connection to what you're going to teach that day, sort of wiring yourself to communicate something in the form of a story, storyfying your own life in a
Right.
sense, looking at your life as a product of many different stories that you're living out on a daily basis.
Lovely.
So if you do that, then storytelling starts becoming more natural to you. It is very natural to the human condition. It's just that we have not exploited the potential of
True.
storytelling enough.
True.
So,
And we've made
yeah.
a performance out of it, which sort of maybe makes people more fearful of it.
That
right?
is one aspect of it. When I go and tell stories to a group of 100 and 200 children at a school or wherever, then the performance element becomes a lot more important. That it is performance,
Of course.
right? But when I'm in a classroom and I have to communicate a concept on, let's say, civics, for example,
Yes, yeah.
and this is a book that I want to talk about, Kali Wants to Dance. It's one of my favorites. I can simply just read out this story beautifully, with a little bit of expression and voice modulation and all of that. Or I can just tell the story of this boy called Kali, and today I want to tell you a story about this boy that I read about. Make it very conversational, casual.
Chatty,
Then bring
yeah.
in the story and say, this is the book that his story is in. You might want to pick it up. It's in the school library. And why is this story important for us today? Because today we're going to talk about untouchability,
Right.
which is the chapter in civics,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Or rights, equal rights and duties. You talked about that a little
Mhm.
before in your
Mhm.
in your section.
Mhm.
So that's the thing. It doesn't have to be a great performance that you rehearse over and over, lose sleep over, because the teacher has enough things to lose sleep over. And we
Right.
certainly don't want storytelling to add on to that.
Absolutely. That's
Yeah.
the point.
Yeah.
Spot on.
Yeah.
Like, right? You know,
Yeah.
it's an aid. You want them.
Yeah.
You want the story to assist them and not become a
Exactly,
burden, right?
exactly.
Yeah.
So think of it as a conversation that you would have at home with someone. You know, when you start talking to somebody, you know, you immediately break into story. So you know what happened that day? I was going there, and you know, suddenly there was this thing that just came up. So that is really how normal and natural storytelling is to a human being. I think we have to be a little conscious to that and bring it out strategically in the classroom.
Right.
Yeah. So it helps to be trained in storytelling, of course, because then you're aware of the theory of it,
Mhm.
and that you know that your story needs to have, you know, an opening. It has to have characters, setting, plot, problem,
Mhm.
solution.
Climax.
Yeah. So then you tell your story so that all those boxes are checked.
Right.
So, and the more you do it, the more natural it becomes to you.
Right.
And that is why the best teachers are the best storytellers.
And you've neatly turned that around on its head, not the other way around, right? The best storytellers are not the best teachers. The
Not
best.
necessarily. Yes, yes.
So what about, I mean, I know at the school level too, you've done a lot to bring stories into St. Kabir Public School, Chandigarh, right? I mean, you've sort of, let's say, storified the school in different ways. I mean, you've approached it from the angle of the teachers, where you're
Right.
sort of assisting them, then with the students, where you sort of conduct these literature festivals, invite authors in.
Right.
Do you think it's something that a school can easily do, and without without making a big song and dance of it, like, right? I mean,
Yeah.
because it's not possible for all schools to invest heavily in doing these
Sure.
things, really.
Absolutely.
So what are the ways in which schools can bring stories into their campuses,
Right.
really?
So it not every school may want to have someone in specifically for that role.
Mhm.
So it helps to invest in training teachers to be able to do storytelling with curricular connections. Storytelling training is available as storytelling,
Okay.
but I think we need to really push a lot more and get to what is useful for a teacher. So it really helps if the school management is already sold on the idea. And I think that's where I'm really lucky to have found partners in St. Kabir, because even before the NEP became the NEP became a document and was released, they were really sold on the idea of wanting to do this and bringing in somebody who can sort of steer the curriculum in that direction. But in the absence of that, I think teachers can also equip themselves to take on the role of a storytelling teacher, not necessarily not just be a teacher, but a story educator. And today the resources are available; they are out there. So yes, one needs to go and seek, and you shall find.
Yes.
Right. So therefore, that's certainly doable at a personal level. That's if you don't have the support of the structural support, the infrastructure that you need from a school. But schools I know today are willing to do all of these different things to make learning more engaging. You may not want to have a lit fest because it is resource intensive. There are a lot of monies involved. However, you can have just author interactions.
That's right.
Or you can do one session for a grade perhaps. Or invite a storyteller and ask them to spend, let's say, 3 months with your school for a particular subject or a concept that you're looking to cover, and get that person to come in and support the curriculum with story connections. Now this is a concept that is very prevalent in the West. We haven't really explored it so much in India.
Okay.
But today I think we have enough storytellers out there also who can come in and help
Assist.
you. Yeah. So I think schools should be looking for such people. and give them certain deliverables that are connected to the curriculum, because the curriculum is all laid out. Those documents are available for everybody. You have your learning objectives document for every subject. So you share that with your storyteller, your resource person, and say, can you give us 4 sessions of stories, 5 sessions of stories in a week, and that is going to assist what the teacher is doing in the lesson. So it takes the pressure off the teacher also to learn as many stories and tell them,
Absolutely.
right?
Absolutely.
But she can, of course, then draw the connections very well, because that's what teachers do.
That's right.
Yeah,
That's right.
so there are many ways to make it happen. I think a lot of it is about having the will to do it.
Absolutely.
Yes. Yeah. So
I think you've hit the nail on the head. It's really the will to bring all this into school. Never mind never mind what the budgets are, never mind, what the
Yeah.
facilities available are.
Yeah.
And I think it's just lovely for us to see, when we come from the outside, the books that we bring in are books of fiction to us. But to see the connections
Yes.
getting made in school,
Yes.
I mean, really, this opens our eyes to the wonderful ways in which books from the retail market can
Absolutely.
make their way into. And Muttama was saying this even earlier, that when she discusses with the various teachers who walk into the pop-up and ask for recommendations, making these connections for
Yes.
them just makes their job
Absolutely.
a lot
Absolutely.
easier.
And I think that's really where the gap is, that there are books out there in the market that are being written, and then there are textbooks, but there isn't anybody sort of who can connect the two, or there are very few
Don't
people who are
read.
doing that role now. So I would like to, through this show, talk to the storytellers and educators who are out there who think that they have the skill sets to be able to connect these two items, and you have a whole new genre of people that can go in and fill in that gap.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So very well said. I know you had one or two more books to recommend.
Yeah. Oh,
Would
I had
you-
this one. This
Yes,
one. This
which
is
I
a
know
favorite.
before we sign off.
The Incredible History of how dull and dreary geography can be.
Yeah, really, which was not for us.
Not for us.
Not for us growing
Yes.
up, because we looked
Yes.
at the atlas
Yes.
every week,
Yes.
our every day, even,
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
Yeah.
So this book is, I think it's a slightly more simplified version of Land of the
Seven Rivers. That's right.
written
yes.
specifically for children. That, of course, is for older readers. But I love the style of the way in which the author, it just feels like you're having a conversation with the author. Everything is so relatable, and I like these little segues that he makes into mythology and history, and then why the landform sort of affected that incident in history. And so just reading this one book is enough to understand, I think, how this country came to be. We just take it for granted that India was this country that just has been there forever, right?
It has the mountains and the plateaus
Yeah.
and the rivers and plains that it has. They
Yeah.
just emerged.
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. And then connecting it to the Gond people. He talks about the Gondwana plate here and says that the Gond people are so today we're talking about the Gond tribes and their art. And do we really take a moment to think that they are among the oldest people in this country? I mean, just look at how much history we're sitting on, and that we just take for granted. So I think this book is a great adjunct to the geography textbook, because that's what geography in the early years is. It's about understanding your own immediate environment before you go off and study the various other continents. So this book, I think, helps a whole lot.
Life skills, you probably had one
Yes.
ready.
Yes.
Something
Life
that-
skills I had ready, and Gita. I'm picking up the names of all these books because we've used them quite successfully. Ready is this amazing book that from by Rupa, which is based on the Scouts and Guides movement, and I could relate on so many personal levels because I've been a guide.
Yes.
So to me, when I saw this book, I was like, wow, this just takes me back to what all we used to do. We used to go off on those camps and
Learn to tie
knots and make first aid, and everything was then translated into a badge. So you had to collect so many badges. So I use this book as part of the value education classes.
Wonderful way to do that, actually.
And I
Yeah.
found there were so many connections to the textbook that was being used already.
Oh, there's a value education.
Yeah, so it's essentially a book of stories, and then the values come out of it, which is a good way to do it, no doubt. But what I really loved about Ready was that it made this whole thing experiential. Value education is otherwise seen as a very, it's just value education class.
The moral of the story is, and then you forget it and go away.
Exactly. So this is a book that makes it really live for the kids. So they have to go out and do things and experience each of these values playing out, and the conflicts that emerge. So therefore, you're questioning what are your values, your own values, your personal values, and how does that align with values of an organization that you're a part of. So there are so many interesting things, conversations that come out of this book. And of course, Gita for Children, which is also Rupa's bestseller. I think, it's a hit. So this also, because of the way a text like the Gita has been broken down for kids and makes it cool.
Yeah, really. With life lessons, filled with cool life lessons. Really.
She talks about the Beatles and Batman
and Messi,
all these really, relatable characters that otherwise don't find mention in a classroom. I mean, who's talking about the Beatles, right?
That's right. Yeah.
So, and it's also a great way to help kids see that these are not just characters that exist in comics. That all the comics that we read have very strong philosophical undertones that we don't otherwise, talk about, think too much about. Right? I think even in Star Wars, for that matter, that is moral education.
Yes,
in 7 parts.
Evil.
Yeah. So I wish somebody would turn that into a book for the classroom.
Good suggestion there. Really, yeah. I can see a couple of comments. I mean, I'm not sure. Sunila was saying some book is fantastic. I'm not sure which one of those, possibly The Incredible History of Kali. But she also says it's so important what you talk about, Deepta, this connecting things to what they learn in the curriculum via stories. I mean, it's just wonderful what you're doing in the school here, and more power to you, more power to your teachers. We really need our children to come out of school with fresh imaginations, with a lot of creativity. And if we can aid that process like this, right? I mean, we're just going to have a wonderful generation of thinkers, going forward.
I don't think I answered your question about assessments. You made a point about that. So I think the most important role for a story educator to play is to look at stories as both process and product. So story as input and what the child would create as a result of having listened to that story. And I think that we don't give that enough value or attention. Asking a student to create a story based on his or her understanding of the concept is the highest level of learning that you can perhaps reach on the Bloom's taxonomy. I'll make it more academic now. Okay. So creativity is the highest level of learning, right? So if a child can actually write out a story or tell a story based on his or her understanding of any concept that is being taught, that means that you've connected learning at so many levels. There is understanding at the most basic level, comprehension, analysis, whatever else, and creativity being right at the top. So we don't give enough attention to story making as much as we do to storytelling. And as we go higher up the grade level, story making becomes a lot more important. And it has to build up, right? From the early grades. So the more I listen to a story, the more the structure of a story sort of hits and sticks in my brain, and helps me when I'm creating content, whether I'm, if I'm writing an essay or if I'm writing a project report. I know that the narrative structure is works a certain way,
Mhm.
and I'm able to bring that out a lot better. So I think we've got to put equal emphasis on storytelling and on story making,
Nice.
which is again a product of sense making. When you listen to a story, you're making sense of the world,
Mhm.
right? And if I can make sense of something I've listened to and make new sense for myself,
Mhm.
that's the sort of the zenith
Pinnacle. Yeah.
of learning for me.
Super.
Yeah.
Thank you for that, Deepta. It was really, I mean, it's just wonderful. I mean, I'm convinced that we should spend as Funky Rainbow more time at school
Yes.
because it brings us back to our books
Yes,
and makes
yes.
us look at them in new ways,
Yes,
really.
yes.
And delighted that we've had a chance to sort of interact with the teachers at school, to bring these books into their curriculum in some way or the other, facilitated by you, of course. It's just been wonderful, and I'm looking forward to this journey continuing across the years.
Yes.
Thank you, Deepta, for joining us today. And as I said, of course, thank you for lending us your room.
Thank you so much. Thank you for taking over.
I'm going to say hello and thank you to so many people who've joined us. K Cool, Lally Stories, Tara Veeraraghavan, We Read FB, Renu, Nandini Nair, Shiraz Saini, Jyoti Nair,
Oh, hi, Shiraz.
Janvi. Yes, Shiraz said hello to you. Mm, uh, Ashar, Fangirl, Lavender Blue, Anantaram, Sharmila, Sujita Selvakumar, Neelam, Ritvika Roy, Vijayalakshmi Nagaraj, Champaka Books, Ponderous, Srinivasan, Nidhi Agarwal, Sunila Kulkarni Gupte, Shiraz, Bhanu, Ramakrishna, T4 Tales, Seerath Gujral, I think I know who Seerath Gujral is, Stringer Story, Ashok Scape, Wheels on Feet, the name is Srinidhi Kashyap, Divya Menon, Avyukt, Ameya, my gosh,
Wow, that's
Create
a lot.
Impact, Ram Natri, Zed, The Beginning, Talking Turtles, Karen Aurora Balhaya, Amrita Patwardhan, what a delight. Thank you so much for joining us from the Parag Trust, Peppy Corner, Tanya Devangi, Ravi Anantam. Thank you so much for joining us. And I'm going to just check whether somebody else. Okay, my colleague's written saying I'm sending you all the names in one message itself. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Sorry. Do we have time for one more book? I think
Sure.
it just came to my head and I forgot.
Absolutely.
I don't
We
think
always
talked
have
about,
time for
yes,
one more book.
we didn't talk about science stories. Why the Sky is Blue.
Yes, C.V.
By
Raman.
Tulika, which is, yeah.
Shall we have the cover?
Do we have the cover?
Yes, we do. We have all the covers.
I must. I would hate myself for it if I had not mentioned this.
We always have time for one more book. That's
Yes. So I want to mention this book because it gives us such a beautiful peek into the mind of this brilliant scientist, and I think by extension any scientist, which is so important for children. Science is not just about learning the concepts and the definitions of laws and whatnot, but how the people who gave us all of this information, what went on in their lives, in their
Absolutely.
minds, and what really, because we reduce everything to a one or two line sentence in the textbook. But if you just look at C.V. Raman's story, and Why the Sky is Blue, and the concept of light scattering is really the story of his life.
Absolutely.
And that he gave it everything. And to get that Nobel Prize, the amount of work that he did, I think is so fascinating. It helps children understand how to build scientific temper, which should really be the goal of science education.
Absolutely.
And if we can get children to understand what happens in the life of a scientist, how do they observe these little things around them, how do they develop a questioning mind, because really it's those questions that lead them to these the hypotheses and the testing of it, and finally the discoveries itself.
Yes, absolutely.
And which we can just simply put down in one line definition and say, okay, now go and learn this.
I know, but that's not what it is
yes,
at all.
But I'd say really, if educators can bring in the stories of scientists, their biographies into the classroom, science education would just turn on its head, I think.
I couldn't agree more with you. We did the Ramanujan biography as
Yes.
part of the recommendations. We have wonderful ones on Jagdish Chandra Bose,
Yes.
Jagdish and the
And now with
Talking
Lavanya
Plant,
Karthik series,
Dreamer
the Dreamer
series.
series. Yes.
And I think somebody pointed out, I
Yes.
think Nidhi, sort of pointed out saying that That was such a, if we could go into the lives of these people
Oh,
to get
yes.
kids to understand what made them the people they were,
Yeah.
that's giving them a lot of insights
Yeah.
into being creative or scientific or imaginative themselves,
Which is an
really.
important skill today. No matter what job you're going to be doing, you need to be able
Absolutely.
to, look at something scientifically and be a skeptic,
Mhm.
right?
Be a
Before
questioning.
be a question. Yes, absolutely. Yes.
That's exactly what it is. Nidhi is saying such excellent info. Wish parents would understand the importance as well. Well, we're hoping,
We're
and
hoping.
Sunila saying, thank you, Deepta. Such a fabulous, thought provoking session with you.
Thank you.
And my colleagues sending me a couple of more names. Jyoti Narayan and Nandita. Thank you so much. I know we far exceeded our time, but that's just us. We have so many stories to tell. That's just Deepta, who has a hell of a lot of stories to tell always. But I'm hoping you enjoyed the bazaar. There are all these books that we've recommended and a lot more in our collection. So www.funkyrainbow.com, click on the tab that says Book Bazaar, go to season 5 and Stories in the Classroom. There's just hundreds of books that my colleagues Netra and Bharti have tagged into this bazaar. We'll see you next week again with another bazaar. But till then, stay storied. I mean, come on, read those books, folks. There's no better thing than a story in this world to keep you happy, healthy, and thinking. Bye
Bye bye.
bye.